Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Malpractice Show presented by Razzball. I am Dr. Donkey Teeth, joined as always by the Boof. And we got a special guest this week, Sam Wallace of RotoViz.com. What's happening, Sam?
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me on. Excited to talk some football and some buy high guys you should be looking at this offseason.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. How did you end up at RotoViz? We had Mike Beers on our podcast last year after he schooled us in the inaugural Raz Bowl that we ran. So we're familiar with Mike's work.
Yeah, he does phenomenal work. I'm about 4 months into joining the RotoViz crew. I joined kind of late January, early February of this year. So I'm still kind of getting to know a lot of the people, but from the little bit I know of Mike, he does incredible work, both behind the scenes and kind of in his writing as well. It's cool. It's a very humbling experience, to be sure, to be surrounded by that many talented people, but it's cool. It's a really cool opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, RotoViz, I think I was a sub way back. Like, I don't know, how long have they been in business? Do you know? Is it 10 years? Would 10 years ago have been early days?
I feel like I should know this and I don't. being a company man, I should know these things, but
I think it was probably around 2010. I was a sub in the early days, and actually at the time I was planning just kind of friend leagues and stuff, and it actually was too good. It was just too deep. Like some of the guys they were highlighting and stuff, it was just like, I'm never going to need to know that in my little friend league. So now it's awesome, but I have a lot of respect, been following RotoViz for a long time. So pretty cool to get a writer from your site here.
Yeah, it's cool. I kind of still have that new guy feeling when I look around the website and, kind of our, like the Slack channel that we have and, sharing ideas and things. I'm like you said, I'd like to think I know a couple little things about fantasy in my own little corner of the world, but I start reading some of these articles and some of the tools these guys create. I'm like, man, I got to find an excuse to use this stuff because it's so far beyond what I was used to.
Yeah. Pretty cool stuff they got there.
Well, Boof, you had an article that piqued your interest that Sam wrote, and that's what prompted us to get you on the show. So, Boof, let's go with this article. Let's
do it. So, you wrote a series this offseason about buying high on certain players.
Yep.
And that's certainly I love when I hear that term, because I think to me this is something that is a huge deal in your leagues, whatever league it may be, in-season trading, off-season trading, in the Dynasty world, which you mentioned in one of your articles, which is really one of the more fun things, and why I love Dynasty is because the season never ends.
Yeah, exactly.
But I figured we could all just chip in with an idea of, buy high could mean a lot of things. What does it mean to you, Sam, and what sparked your interest to write an article with that concept in mind?
Yeah, that was actually a buy high piece was kind of my inaugural piece at RotoViz that I kind of pitched to them, and they said, hey, you want to send us a writing sample that we can kind of review and see if you'll be a good fit for us. And it was a buy high piece on Deebo Samuel that I wrote kind of back at the end of January. And that concept was, I guess, because I wanted to be a little bit different, not to be too contrarian from the norm. I wanted to provide some substance, but the whole fantasy community is kind of enamored with this, buy low, sell high. You want to get out of guys, a year early, and this guy's a value, but we're always talking about value, and that's a good thing. And you want to have positive return on those guys, but at the same time, you want to build competitive teams. And if it means kind of shooting your shot on a guy that is expensive now, but I think is still an ascending talent, then I'm willing to kind of make those moves. And I think timing is a big part of it. And I was kind of just jotting some notes down for myself. At the end of the day, you peel back all the layers on film analysis and people creating all these models and the analytics and the data, we're all just, making educated guesses. That's all we're doing. But part of it is collecting and kind of being able to work with a large amount of variables and saying, okay, based on what I know, this is a likely outcome, or, things could go in my favor, but it's kind of shooting your shot, so to speak, which I kind of like doing. I like to be a little bit more aggressive with some of these guys, especially if I like them, but it's trying to catch guys as they're still ascending before they've truly, become top 5 guys in their position or something like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's huge. And value is not only the guy who's a penny stock right now, but sometimes the value is Apple when it was still at $150 or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I love that idea, and you're right. I mean, we're flooded. The Twitter sphere and on all fantasy, is flooded with buy lows and sell this guy. But that's why I really like the idea of focusing on who's expensive, but actually is not as expensive as they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an area where just the information is not as readily available. So it's a lot of making your own decision,
Yep.
which, instead of copying what you've seen or read, it's really, you have to do your own analysis.
Right.
And then to me, like buying high, I mean, can you define a player as irreplaceable? I mean, truly irreplaceable. We talk about replacement level production off the waiver wire and things like that. But on the flip side of that, CMC is the obvious example. I mean, what McCaffrey's done over the last couple of years, I mean, he's a receiver one and a running back one rolled into one player.
Yep.
You can offload almost anything, and it's probably worth it to add him to your squad. Obviously, we know that now about him, but who are the next set of guys who could be that? Who maybe no one. I mean, CMC could be a once in a lifetime type of guy, but those are the guys where when you can say this is going to be an irreplaceable production,
Mm-hmm.
I will acquire it for a package or a draft picks, because you can send 3 draft picks to get this guy and maybe you'll get half of him, and that would still be a good pick.
Right.
So guys like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I was actually just having this conversation with somebody the other day about, in Superflex startup leagues, I've been kind of seeing, there've been 4 players that have kind of gone in the top 4 in differing orders, being Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, and Saquon Barkley. I've kind of gone, they've been like the top 4 consensus in Superflex, but I've seen, different orders for all of those. And I was kind of on board with like, if you can get what I would say, a generational talent in really any of those players, it seems like they're so far above and beyond. But I've really kind of come back to settle on putting like Mahomes as my 101 in Superflex because of, I don't think he's as replaceable as any of those other running backs. I mean, like you said, you get like 2 players in one with a McCaffrey, and, when Barkley's healthy, he kind of fell off a little bit last year, but you essentially get 2 players in one. But we know how quickly running backs turn over, how turnover heavy that position is. Injuries can pile up. We know the contract situation that a lot of these guys find themselves in of, they want their money, and I'm almost always going to be on the side of players, cashing out when they can. But from a football standpoint, it's not always in the best interest of the team.
Sure.
So I look at somebody like, hey, if I'm building a dynasty squad in Superflex, why would I not want to get somebody like Mahomes, who should be like a top 5 quarterback for the next decade? I mean, that it seems kind of outlandish to say that, but based on what we know and what he's done in the system that he's in, like you pretty much can't pay enough to get him, because he's going to be a standalone value by himself and pretty much irreplaceable for so long that it's going to be worth pretty much whatever you give up to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's not even outlandish. I mean, top 5 for the next decade seems about right.
Yeah, right.
Donkey, you got any thoughts on either what buy high means to you, or we can transition into, is buying high a skill, or is it just kind of lucky? And does it give you an advantage in your league if you can do it well?
Well, I mean, if you can do anything well, it gives you an advantage.
Right? Okay, that's true.
That's very true.
I think to build on what you said about like Apple stock move, that's exactly where my mind went. And we talk about Dynasty League specifically in investment terms quite a bit. I think that you hit it on the head. Like, buy high, if the owner of, let's use Miles Sanders as a guy we're going to talk about next as an example, paid $1 for Miles Sanders, and he's now worth $50 if we're just putting dollar terms on things. He thinks that he's selling him high, and he is, it's 50 times what he paid for him. But if you think that he's going to be worth $100 tomorrow, I mean, like you said, it's like buying Apple when it was $50. It seemed like it was a lot more expensive than it was maybe a couple of years before, but now it's worth probably $380 a share or something crazy like that. So
right.
Yeah, it's all relative, and you're just trying to pick that guy that you think is going to continue to increase in value. I think it's that simple, but in practice, it's not always as easy, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of something like I touched on before where, at the end of the day, it's all an educated guess. Like you said, we're all just gathering the information that we can based on the information available to us. And, as we kind of transition, I guess, towards that Miles Sanders piece, one of the things I was really thinking of And I kind of started to plant my flag in the Miles Sanders camp a little while ago, even kind of before the article came out. But, at any point in time, the Eagles could have gone out and signed a veteran and said, okay, no, we're committed to this committee, or they could have drafted somebody. And, you kind of have to call your shot a little bit before a lot of those things happen and hope that, yeah, okay, based on what I think I know, here's where I think his stock is going to go. Like you said, he might be worth $50 now, but tomorrow or next week or next month, or by the time the season rolls around, he's going to be worth twice that again.
Yeah. And I think,
sorry,
I lost my train of thought.
That was when I really started to get excited about Miles Sanders this offseason, was when the Eagles didn't draft anybody.
Yep.
And didn't sign any of those backs that were out there. I know that they were sniffing around Carlos Hyde. Now it's like, you want Devontae Freeman or nobody. You
right.
know?
He's kind of the biggest name left out there that would pose even what I would consider to be somewhat of a threat to, his touch count in the backfield.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, now it's Miles Sanders and Boston Scott, and that's it. You mentioned in your article that last year after Jordan Howard went down, that he was pretty much a bell cow back. He took 63.2% of all the running back opportunities in the backfield. I'm really high on Sanders. I'm glad. I know Boof is too.
Okay.
So we got the
consensus,
the triumvirate of Sanders fan. I ranked him number 6 overall in my PPR rankings that I dropped a couple weeks back. So I'm fully on board with you. I know Boof is as well. So our question to you off the bat is, Doug Peterson, his backfield has mostly been running back by committee. Everybody talks about that as a knock on Miles Sanders. So in your opinion, is that a reflection of the running backs that he's had to work with thus far in his career as a head coach? Or is it just going to be a philosophical choice that continues to move forward with?
Yeah, that was actually the very first place I started, really, even before I started penciling the article out. When I was diving into the research, I wanted to kind of attack that that thought of, okay, here's what we think we know about Peterson and how he coaches. Is there truth to it, or is this kind of more narrative street driven? That's just kind of what we keep telling ourselves, that it is what it is. So I just wanted to look back at his last 7 years, 3 years of offensive coordinator in Kansas City, and then his 4 years as head coach with the Eagles. So looking at that 7-year chunk of time, and this is a little bit more subjective at this point, but after I kind of broke down the data, looking at, Miles Sanders, I think, is the second most talented back he's ever had in that 7-year stretch, aside from the 2 years he worked with Jamal Charles in Kansas City, and that was back in 2013 and 2014. But otherwise, he's had Sharkhandrick West, Ryan Matthews, LeGarrette Blount, and Josh Adams the year before. And, you rattle off those names and you don't really think of, top 10 potential running backs from a talent perspective. And then, they all kind of fell in that, mid 30-ish range percent of running back opportunities. And Sanders kind of fit right in with 39.4%. And that was average over across the season. So it was obviously less than that, even leading into, before he really took the lion's share of the work over the second half of the year. So I think there's some definite philosophical truth to Peterson wanting to, establish a committee and to spread the touches around. But I was a little bit more excited because of the draft capital that was invested in Sanders. That's kind of really what bridged the gap for me between looking at, okay, here's a guy who, is kind of stuck in a committee. He was splitting with Jordan Howard, and Boston Scott got some run. But, the Eagles invested the highest capital in a running back position in Sanders, being the 53rd pick overall, that they've invested in any running back rookie drafted since LaShawn McCoy, who was also, oddly enough, the 53rd overall pick. So the draft capital alone kind of spoke volumes to me. And it's one thing to kind of follow what a team says and looking at their history, but, it's always good to follow their actions as well. They didn't sign anyone. They didn't draft anybody. Peterson hasn't really come out and said, hey, we are giving Sanders the majority of the work. He's going to be a 3-down back. Like, he hasn't said that explicitly, but you start kind of looking through their actions, and it's kind of alluding to this is kind of maybe going to be his backfield, or at least a good chunk of it heading into 2020.
Yeah. And, if you look at these names, first of all, man, R.I.P. Sharkhandrick West. He was an exciting dude for like half a minute there.
He was a league winner that year, if I'm not mistaken.
But you look at these names, and actually, not only were they not super talented by many metrics, but none of them were drafted, other than Charles, who was drafted by the Chiefs. West, I believe, was maybe UDFA or maybe 6th or 7th round, super late. Matthews was obviously not with his first team because that must have been the Eagles' year. Blount obviously not with his first team. Josh Adams was like a UDFA. So like you said, draft capital and or these were second contract, third contract running backs, which I think is another thing to really keep in mind. In addition to just, I think the pure talent of what Sanders brings to the table. So yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, these coaches, first of all, Peterson's smart. And
Yep.
they want to win.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're going to just hammer in a committee. I think there's not that many coaches that are going to hammer in a committee when it's pretty obvious you've got a guy who's built to handle the load and is handling the load. And if you're a big GIF highlight type guy, there's plenty of good instances out there of Sanders being a great pass blocker too. So,
Yep.
he's the kind of guy that can stay on the field, do the dirty things, pass block if you need it. Obviously, athletically carrying the ball, he's sensational too. So I'm in lockstep with that as well. Appreciated the history, backing it up with hey, let's put this in context, not just say narrative street running back by committee type guy.
Yeah, it's just really just the combination of all of those. Like you said, he kind of fit the bill of a committee, but like you said, you look at his physical metrics, you look at his production, you look at his draft capital, and then the lack of team activity. You start piecing together all of those variables. And if he's somebody that I'm wrong about, that's fine. Like he's someone I'm willing to, stake my claim to. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I feel like I've done enough digging and pointing to enough positive variables that this is a semi-likely outcome.
Yeah, like me and say we've named our show Fantasy Malpractice. The first episode, that's exactly what we talked about. We're all making our best guess.
Yep.
Nobody who tells you this is the way it is right. Everybody's doing the best they can to make a guess. And so we're going to be wrong a lot. We just want to be right 56% of the time, maybe. That's
Right.
probably better.
As long
than
as you can show some improvement and some growth, as long as you're not, beating your head against the wall every year with bad takes that are unfounded. But yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, the bottom line you have, for those who didn't read it, but I definitely suggest you go read it if you're listening to this, is pay up for the talent, efficiency, and a growing workload. And then just to talk into more maybe nuts and bolts. So he's a buy high. What would you do? I mean, how would you give it up? I think you talked at the end a little bit about spending a certain startup pick, or maybe what pick you would trade for him, but like what kind of package is buying high? I think I thought of just like maybe like, would you send off James Conner and a first, or is AJ Brown and some change, something that you would consider? What package looks like paying up to you?
Yeah, I would, if I was a team that I felt was a contender and was maybe missing a good cornerstone running back piece, like I think Miles can be. And I always hesitate, when I get a lot of trade questions from people all the time, and they say, oh, well, I want to trade like this future pick, and I'm projecting it to be earlier, I'm projecting it to be late. And that's all well and good, but I really struggle giving objective kind of third-party advice to people without seeing the context of either their roster or their league or things like that, because you just don't know. Too many things can happen that might push what you projected to be a late pick. Suddenly it's a lot early. Your team didn't do as well as you thought. But if I'm looking at my own team and I feel like my future first is going to be late, if I could package James Conner and a first for Sanders, I'd do it, just because I don't feel like Conner is going to be a long-term answer in Pittsburgh. I think with Big Ben coming back, that'll help. I think the running game, because it'll open up the passing game a little bit more. But yeah, if you really want to be aggressive, if I could get away with selling Conner in a second for Sanders, I would, for sure. But if it meant selling a first and I felt I was a piece away from contending, I definitely would.
What about AJ Brown? Is he on the table for someone like Sanders?
See, for me, he's really not, because I'm a very, a self-proclaimed AJ Brown truther, and I have been for a long time. I kind of view them similarly, and I kind of just threw a note to myself there in the show doc that said, context matters. Your roster construction matters, which is another reason why giving sometimes objective trade advice to people is tough, because are they flush with wide receiver talent? Are they barely scraping by a starting lineup? Do you have a lot of future capital? Do you have a lot of running back depth? It's tough. I mean, you could consider somebody like AJ Brown and Miles Sanders kind of equal value in a vacuum, depending on what they could do. They're both young, and I think in good teams. Obviously, Brown's in more of a rush-heavy team at his wide receiver position, but I think a lot depends on how you want to build your roster.
Yeah. DT, any thoughts on what you would send off to acquire, or if you had Miles Sanders, or I guess, yeah, if you don't have him, what you would send off?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be trading him if I had him.
Sure.
I mean, I've got him ranked number 10 overall in my Dynasty PPR rankings, which is saying a lot for a running back. I definitely would give up a first in James Conner. I'm with you there. I think, Boof, you're a little bit higher on James Conner than Sam and I. I'm not a believer long term either. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned about him this year, honestly, with all those young backs they've got. I see the upside. I'm not feeling super confident in that. The AJ Brown one is interesting. I think that consensus valuation probably puts Sanders a bit ahead of AJ Brown, but you throw a wide receiver into the mix, and I could see them being pretty close. And you're right, if you're flush with running backs and you need a receiver, you're gonna get that longevity out of AJ Brown that you discussed when we were talking super flex and Patrick Mahomes and that like. So yeah, I don't hate that, but I would definitely, if I had Sanders, I would need quite a bit on top of AJ Brown, to be honest. I'm just that excited about Sanders, and you need those top running backs to win your fantasy championship. You know what I mean?
Yep. Especially, the younger ones too, keep cycling through young running backs while they're on their rookie contracts, because as soon as they end up in situations like, and kind of James Conner is a good example, love the player, love the story, just not a believer in what he's going to be able to do, whether it's staying healthy or how that offense is going to look. Yeah. So it's a lot of it is dependent on how you want to build your team.
Sure. And the receiving that Sanders brings, I mean, he's like, he is not going to be CMCs, because I'm not going to put that on anybody, but like, he's got potential to catch 75 balls, I think.
Right.
And that to me is just better than, say a Nick Chubb, who's awesome. Nick Chubb's awesome. He's not going to catch 75 balls. So when you have that even potential there, just push all your chips into the middle. That's why I like talking about what is that overwhelming offer? Because if you don't have him and you want to get him, you are going to have to floor the other guy. So you're probably going to lose the trade on paper. But like I said, when you think you've got getting an irreplaceable production, it's probably worth it. So good stuff on Sanders. One other thing I like in the article, just as a teaser for you guys to go check it out. He was actually the most efficient on adjusted yards per attempt of any pass catcher for the Eagles last year. Like I said, just highlighting, he's not just a running back. He's a really good receiver of the football and makes things happen. So like that tidbit as well, like that chart in there. But yeah, moving on to Calvin Ridley. I got to say, reading your piece, I'm slowly changing off my priors with him. have not been a huge Ridley guy. But I liked what you said in here. Efficiency as a young player, although he's not that young, but but efficiency early on in your career is huge for future performance. He's done that. Falcons' most pass-heavy team in the league on a per-game basis. So, that was the big thing for me reading that, and I knew it, but I hadn't really thought about it exactly. But you mentioned, he could, this could be like a Evans Godwin situation where you've got one team but two top 10 receivers. I know that's asking a lot of any team to support two top 10 receivers, but you made a case where I was like, that's not insane. I mean, that's not. So I like what you did there. Anything you want to add? And then I've got some follow-ups or I think DT's got some follow-ups with that article.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, a lot of it's just kind of talking about range of outcomes, a range of potential outcomes for a player. And you kind of touched on that when we wrapped up the Sanders discussion. Like you said, him catching 50 or more, 60 or more passes in a season, that's feasible. Nick Chubb is one of the best pure rushers in football, but that's not within his range of outcomes. It's just not going to happen. So it's, how do you want to attack those positions and how do you want to build those guys around your lineup? But, if there's going to be a team that can support two wide receiver ones, it's going to be the Falcons. I mean, they throw the ball 66% of the time on average over the last two seasons. So in Ridley's career, they average 42 pass attempts per game over the last two seasons. So there's just so much volume to go around. And you can get into the whole vacated targets discussion, and I know people talk about that topic differently. And I've come around on it a little bit more because it's not as easy as saying, hey, these guys left. Now those targets are automatically going to go to someone. I mean,
you don't know who it's,
right. Talented players will get more looks, but I think Ridley is that talented. You can say, okay, Sanu left, Freeman left, Hooper left, that was kind of the big one. There's just a big vacuum now where I don't think the Falcons are suddenly going to turn into a rush-heavy team. Gurley finally passed his physical. That's great for him. That's great for the team. But I don't think that's going to suddenly translate to them wanting to pound the ball. Matt Ryan's still in his prime. And, I know Julio Jones is signed through 2023, and that kind of puts a cap on Ridley's ceiling a little bit because he's going to be playing opposite one of the best wide receivers in football. But I'm not worried about it because there's just so much volume. You look at any other team and you say, okay, 20% target share. You need context with that because a 20% target share for the Ravens is a lot different than 20% target share for the Falcons. So just throwing that target share number around is nice. It gives you some idea. But when you say, okay, this team's throwing the ball this many times a game or this many times a season, he's going to get a lot of work. And he's going to see primarily one-on-one coverage playing opposite Julio Jones.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And then, I think the vacated targets is a little misleading sometimes, but certainly there's just sheer volume of targets to go around. So, DT, you got any questions?
Well, so Booth mentioned, off the bat when he was kind of introing the Ridley article, his age, and he was an old guy coming into the league. I mean, old, 24 years old. It's old for a rookie. So he's 26 years old and all. 26 years old now. Do you have any concerns about that moving forward with him?
Not really. And I know age is a huge thing, and youth is a big thing within the Dynasty community, and guys want to, chase the youth and they want to build that youth. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a good thing to balance. It's another variable you have to consider, but you still want to be, chasing titles unless you're in a full rebuild. Now, if you're in a full-blown rebuild where you're just, selling out for the next couple of seasons, Ridley's probably not a guy you want to target. You probably want to go younger yet with some of these draft classes. And like you said, he was an older guy coming in. But for me, I'm usually thinking in like a 2 to 3 year window anyways for Dynasty. And that's fine. So, you said he's 26 right now. So he'll be 27, 28, 29.
I think he turns 26 sometime in the season. So
this is like going to be his age, like late 25, 26 season. That's fine. If I can get him, what I think is going to be in prime, Matt Ryan throwing the ball a ton yet, and Julio Jones is still under contract during the next 3 years, that's great. So I'm not as concerned about youth because if I can get 3 or 4 solid years out of him, great. And I'm not saying he's going to be the next Julio Jones and play well into his 30s and still be dominant. I don't think very many people are as that physically imposing as Julio, who can play that strong that late into their career. But yeah, I'm not as concerned about his late age compared to his, only 2 years of NFL experience.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you're in rebuild mode, context matters again. If you're in rebuild mode, he's not necessarily the best guy to target. I've been in more the Booth camp where I just view him as a high-end wide receiver too. I don't see the upside, but you've got me interested. I'll say that.
For sure.
One of the other things that Booth had brought up before the show is the idea that maybe the Falcons bring in another high-end wide receiver prospect in next year's draft as maybe your Julio Jones type replacement to play that alpha role, the big man to go up and get it. What are your thoughts on that?
That was an interesting question. When he had posed that to me earlier, I looked at that and said, that's not something I'd really considered. And it's not really meant to knock that train of thought. But for me, we obviously want to gather as much information as we can. We want to make the best educated guess with all the available data we have. But I'm not going to base too much of my information or base too much of my action on who might this team draft next year because I don't know. And maybe they're okay with, Julio, Ridley, and maybe Russell Gage surprises some people this year. Maybe Laquan Treadwell has a career resurgence in Atlanta. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen, right? But I mean, as a Packer fan, I was convinced the Packers were going to draft a wide receiver this year. I think they should have, but they didn't. I mean, so like I try not to base too much of my roster construction around what I think a team is going to do in the draft, unless I feel there's like a big glaring need. Like if I was trying to invest in Todd Gurley this year, he's on a 1-year contract. He's banged up. I mean, he's still fairly young, all things considered, but it's a good thought. But for me personally, when I'm targeting Ridley either in drafts or in trades, I'm not super concerned about what I think the team may or may not do in the 2021 draft.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe it's me trying to think, well, two things. It's me trying to think maybe too much like a GM, like I
Yep.
know what's going to happen. And then also, like I think DT touched on, I've got it in my head. He's a complimentary piece. And so I'm like, well, obviously the Falcons are drafting alpha to pair with him. So, but that's purely conjecture. I just thought it was an interesting thought because it's entered my mind as well. But I agree with what you're saying. I mean, you can really only make decisions on stuff to be true right now. We don't know that's true. It's a year away, yada, yada, yada. So,
And kind of to that point, like you said, and if you view him as a high-end wide receiver too, that's fine. I'm not going to sit here and, pound the table for you and say, you guys got to buy him as a wide receiver 1 because it's so close. I mean, a couple points either way could kind of bump him, to wide receiver 10 or to wide receiver 15. I mean, he was the wide receiver 14 overall last year through 14 weeks before he went down. So, I mean, he was already a borderline wide receiver 1 anyways. And if that's his ceiling as a compliment, I'm fine with that.
True.
Like you said, not every guy has to be either a penny stock and not every guy has to be the elite. You still got to have those role players kind of up and down your lineup that fit that need of whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point too. I do think sometimes I get myself into thinking that I want a team full of all elite alphas up and down the line. I just want to crush everyone, but you're right. That's pretty unrealistic. So we do need the fillers. We do need the quality compliments for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, we all want that kind of roster. I thought one thing that you mentioned, Boof, that I think is kind of spot on is that we get it in our mind that this is what that guy is. And then we're kind of like cherry picking stuff to fit him into that box that we've created and already put him in,
I try hard not to do that, but I mean, we just all do it to an extent.
It's tough. It's recency bias, confirmation bias. That's a real thing. You have to recognize that it's real in order to actually address it and make sure that it doesn't influence your analysis too much. Because if you totally ignore it and pretend it's not there, you're probably missing something.
That's a great point. That's for sure true.
Then you end up with a Kerryon Johnson fathead on your wall.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We have to bring up the Kerryon Johnson fathead every episode, I think.
It's all right. You got to own it.
I only got it last week, so
that's fair.
You got it last week because as recently as February, he had. Oh man, how high did you have him? How high?
I think I had him in my number 10 Dynasty running back. Yeah, I got a lot of shit
fantastic.
For that. I didn't think they were going to draft
Swift.
Swift.
Super young.
He is, and
He's
mentioned
very
Gurley.
young.
You mentioned Gurley being young. I'm sure. I mean, yeah, Gurley's what, 25? Like that is crazy to me. He seems like he's 40 by now.
Right. The talk on the streets is that he's washed up already and is never going to play again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we write guys off too fast. I mean, that's another thing we could do a whole show on probably. But
yeah, patience is huge. Yeah. Just wait. It's okay.
Well, do we have any non-football thoughts, DT, to end it out?
Oh, well, I was telling Boof, we try to share, something, especially during this quarantine time, Sam, we've been trying to share something non-football to help the viewers out to watch. And I've been touting the show called Alone. Have you ever seen it?
I have not. It's
a survival show. It's kind of a more serious Naked and Afraid type show. They send these guys out into the wilderness, the guys and girls, for as long as they can survive, and the last one standing wins the prize. And there's not even a camera crew. They film all their own stuff. So the new season just came out. I love that show. It's on History Channel.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That sounds like something I would like.
Yeah, it's serious if it's on the History Channel.
Yeah,
it's true.
I feel like
it's true.
Sam, anything you're watching?
Yeah, I've actually been kind of making my way through the original Star Wars movies again. So my wife and I just got Disney Plus, so it's been fun to, go back and watch some of the original Marvel movies that we haven't seen outside of, the one time in theaters, and then really going back through Star Wars movies again. It's been fun. It's been fun to kind of relive that universe again.
Now, I am not a Star Wars nerd or buff or really anything. I have seen them. How are you doing it? What order? 1 through 9 or the chronological or whatever?
Right now I'm watching them in chronological of the universe. So we started with episode 1. So I know you talk to, tried and true fans, and I'm not a big buff either. I'm just a fan of the movies, but they'll say you got to start with 4 and watch them 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And when I watched them the first time, that's how I did it. But now it's been kind of fun to watch them just more linearly. But yeah.
I'll go with the show as well. This is not a hot take. It's not really any new information. If you haven't seen Ozark, I'm going to get on that tonight. My wife and children are at her parents' house, and so I have the night to myself. I'm just going to put on Ozark, which I haven't seen since probably December, where I left off in the middle of season 2. It's dark, but it is a great story and storytelling. So if you haven't done that, and it's this far into quarantine, I don't know what you've been doing, but if there's
I actually haven't seen any of it yet, and I've been hearing nothing but good things. So I will now have to circle back.
It's really good. I mean, Jason Bateman is becoming one of my just favorite actors. His scope is so big. I mean, watching him in Arrested Development and then watching him in Ozark, it's like, what can't the guy do? He's really good.
That's awesome. All right, I'm going to add that to my show list right now. This is good.
All right.
Well, it's time to wrap it up. We got like a minute left on our free Zoom call here, so
we did it.
Yeah, it's time to wrap up, but it's been a pleasure talking to you, Sam. Again, reiterate, go over to RotoViz, check out Sam's Buy High article. Anything else that you want to talk about that you're working on, Sam, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat again. You guys can find me over on Twitter at @swallace_FF. And right now I'm working on a couple different articles that just went up on decoding backfields of there's a lot of value in like San Francisco. There's a lot of value in Baltimore, but kind of more from a redraft focused piece, how do you break down the opportunities and who's the better value? So that's been a fun series to start working through.
Nice.
Very good.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Sam. This thing is going to end here in less than a minute, or I would chit-chat away, but it was awesome talking. Did you sign up for the Raz Bowl? Are you in on the Raz Bowl?
I think I did, yeah. Somebody sent me the link a while back, so nice. I think I'm in, but I'll double-check. Yeah,
thanks
again, guys. I appreciate it.
Send you the link to join then. Cool. Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you back on during the season at some point.
Sounds good. Catch you guys later.
Cool. All right, bye.
Take it easy, Boof.